Governor Andrew Cuomo is a busy man, so busy that apparently he cannot deal with busy signals. The governor was trying to reach a tenant advocate on his cell phone, but the guy was in the middle of a call. And instead of calling back or leaving a message or any of that, Cuomo reportedly broke in, disconnecting the other guy's call. And I've never heard of this happening before, that a chief executive of a state or a country can just interrupt your phone call and start a conversation. Has anybody at the table heard of that before?
It's creepy.
Do you want effective government, or do you want some namby-pamby?
You're going to get effective government whether you like it or not.
That's right.
Andrew, I just don't buy it. I'm sorry. I'll let you guys debate it. I don't buy the premise.
What premise did he
The
do?
premise. I don't buy the premise of a governor could call and interrupt the
You
call.
don't think it happened?
I haven't talked to several governors on the cell phone. I've never, ever, ever seen this happen.
You've never been that important, Don.
Maybe
Okay,
he hasn't been on the phone when the call came in.
Wow.
Is this something that chief executive should be allowed to do? And should there be a very short list of who? Should the governor be able to do this?
I think if there's a nuclear device about to go off someplace in New York State, he should be able to interrupt the phone call, but not to call a tenant leader about a bill that was not even done yet. Landlords maybe.
Okay.
Landlords, you know. On AT&T.
Do you wish you had this power as county executive?
Oh, I had the power. I called everybody this way. I called them all, interrupted their phone. I'm sorry, talk to your wife later on.
So it does exist. So county exec, it does exist.
You know, in a real emergency situation, you might be able to interrupt for an emergency purpose, but not simply to notify somebody about a legislative action. I mean, so one's really got to question what this is about.
Someone's got to
By the
question
way,
insanity.
Dominic, I don't know what the legality of it is. I never had to use it, never would. But for example, an Indian Point goes haywire. You know, suddenly you got to make calls out to people, and that way you may end up interrupting.
And there are automatic emergency alert systems for things like that. That's what generates those emergency phone calls.
And these days, there's text messages. I mean, you could say Governor Cuomo waiting for you to call him. I mean, that's.
But I just want to put a scary thought in everybody's head, because I've had conversations with this guy, and there are several times where I've pulled the phone away from my ear, wished I wasn't on the call. Imagine Chief Executive Richard Brodsky interrupting your phone call against your will and advocating for whatever it is that he's advocating for. That's scary when you put it in that perspective.
Of all the people at this table, you're the one who would most use that kind of a phone call. So don't generalize from your experience.
I still don't buy it. I really believe this is wrong. I don't buy it.
We will look into it, and I will call you no matter whether you're in the middle of a call or not, and we'll get to the bottom of that.
Okay.
All right, moving on. A new study by the National Academy of Sciences suggests conservatives might be better at dieting than liberals. It says they have better self-control because they believe they can shape outcomes. And I'll let Brodsky stew on this for a second. Gentlemen, you are familiar with and are conservative of your own right. Yeah. Do you think that there's a greater personal responsibility or self-control from conservatives?
Lamentably, I know that is a lie. I'll stick with that.
Yeah, I don't buy that one. I'm sorry.
I wish.
And evidence would indicate not so.
County exec, I'm so glad you said it, because after the show, Andrew will tell me I'm being so negative. Because I'm like, where are we getting this stuff from? Mars? I mean, I don't
just
buy
going
it.
to call you a conservative. And you've got to be.
And Brodsky will call me something else.
That'll be Andrew Cuomo calling you.
Conservatives eat a lot of donuts. You know. Liberals eat a lot of croissants.
Yeah. We eat jelly donuts.
It's the jelly donut croissant problem.
Well, we solved that problem.
All right, we seem to have exhausted that
You're
one.
the one who picks the subject.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
It's a committee thing. It's a committee thing, and the committee's going to get fired. There's a new push to keep Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. You'll remember the Treasury Department said it was going to replace the founding father with a yet-to-be-chosen woman. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke is, quote, appalled by the idea, as are a number of other people. Eric Schneiderman sounded off against it. Alexander Hamilton, a New Yorker. He'll still be on the bill, even with a woman on it. He'll be somewhere else, which is kind of insulting to whichever.
Put him on both on the bill, or some bills will be.
No, I think they're going to put a small version of Hamilton somewhere on the bill. But I haven't asked this group. Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. Is that the wrong?
I'd prefer to do it with Jackson. I think it makes perfect sense to put a historical American woman on a bill. It's been since Martha Washington. It's been 100 and some odd years. Like a Harriet Tubman would be great. I'd choose Jackson. Jackson didn't believe in paper money. No one really likes him historically. He's a better pick than Hamilton. But I think it's proper to do it, and I think you rotate the bills. If you did Harriet Tubman on one 10 and Hamilton on another 10, I think that would be fine.
I don't see why that's such a bad idea. We got 50 different quarters, for goodness sake. Any New York pride in all of this because we're losing a New Yorker on the bill?
No, that's not. It's about Jackson being not a very good man and not a very. He killed a lot of people, especially Native Americans.
Right. Hated centralized bank.
It's a bit. Jackson gone. Leave Hamilton alone.
Yeah, well, and Hamilton historically was for the national bank. I mean, he is critical to the banking of the United States of America. So I think he's the wrong guy to pick
And
on.
Hamilton spent a lot of time in Rockland County, didn't he?
A lot of with George
last
Washington
winter.
and others. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
So who do we think should be the woman on the $10 bill or on whatever denomination? Any ideas?
I go Tubman. Tubman's my
Harriet
pick.
Tubman?
Yeah. If you had to do one for starters, yeah.
Yeah, anyone but Hillary.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Dom, you want to throw one out there?
Harriet
You're going with
Tubman.
Harriet Tubman? All right. Well, we have a little extra time in this segment because the topics that we had originally picked did not go over all that well. So I'm going to bring us back to the beginning of the show, and I'm stalling for time to give our control room time to prepare for all this. The president's use of the N-word. I'm curious what your thoughts are about it and whether it was appropriate and whether it diffuses from the message that the president was trying to make. Dominic and I got into this a little bit in the first segment. Scott, I'm curious your thoughts.
I thought it was used appropriately, and I find it offensive, generally speaking. But his point was that racial prejudice exists in this country, and to ignore it is historically inaccurate. And he was trying to emphasize, and I thought he did it in context. I thought he did it the way you should do it. And as I said, other presidents have used it in context when they're talking about.
Context is the key word, and it's what Reverend Sharpton said. But there has always been almost an absolutist sense that there was no context in which it was acceptable. That there's been a change among people in the black community and elsewhere. And look, this is the Charleston massacre is about something so profound that it's shaken up all kinds of assumptions about language, about appropriate speech, about politics, about the Confederate flag. We're in something of a key moment. This reminds me of what happened after the Birmingham, Alabama bombing in 1963. People started asking themselves very profound questions. I think the president did the right thing.
You know, it's interesting that Mr. Brodsky says that because on Thursday night, Sharpton's going to talk exactly about Birmingham. So it's interesting that you two made the connection.
I'm just going to light the fuse and let you guys come after me. I think racism is deeply exaggerated in America. I think it's deeply exaggerated. I think it's on this president's mind more than it should be. I think he used the word because he thinks about that word. I don't think about that word. I haven't heard that word used in 35 years. I've never heard it used in Republican circles ever, not once.
I love Bill, so I'm just going to pretend he didn't say that. I'll turn it over to you. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
What are you, out of your mind?
I think the greatest racism in this country comes from the left. I think it's paternalism is what is destroying black communities, Latino communities.
The notion that there isn't systematic, ingrained, we're not talking about personality disorders. We're talking about a system that has had enormous practical, visible effects on the African American community. There are two reasons, Bill. Either there's something wrong with them, or there's a system that's been holding them down for generations. Pick or choose.
Yeah, I think the political left thinks there is something wrong with African Americans and Latinos.
Okay. Well,
that there's something that's holding them back.
That is neither,
and I think it's wrong. And I think if we're going to have a real conversation about race in the country, we might as well put it on the table.
It's the left that led the civil rights movement and the right that opposed it.
The Republicans were in the civil rights movement early on.
Some.
A lot of conservatives were not. Republicans were there. Republicans were on that.
But let me say, just from experience, racism exists in every county in New York State. And it exists in Rockland County. And I can tell you honestly, it exists in real estate. It exists in banking. And although doesn't make headlines, human rights commissions like ours go after it.
Racism exists in every heart. There's racism. You get cut off by somebody in a car, you can think of a name to call whoever that person is, depending on whatever flag is on the back of that car. You'll think of that slight. I'm not saying that there's not any racism out there. I'm saying that I think that the African American community will not move forward completely until it is allowed to work on its own. I don't think there's any inherent liability about black people, about Latino people. I think anybody can succeed.
Bill,
I think the spark of God is in each of us.
Like 15 seconds.
15 seconds, okay. I love you. So seriously, I'm going to pretend like you didn't say this. But 10 blacks apply to the University of Albany, 10 whites. How many black people do you think are going to get in?
It should be on the scores. That's the way I see it. It should be on the
Right,
scores.
it should be. But
Yeah.
how many black people are going to get in?
More than the scores suggest. More than the scores suggest. That's the truth.
I
and if
love Bill
we're going to have a
O'Reilly. So
conversation,
he
if
didn't
we're
say
going to have an
that.
honest conversation, we have to have that
System of
conversation.
apartheid in this country. We had a segregated,
I'm not
legally
saying that didn't
segregated.
exist. I'm not
Preach,
saying that
Brother
didn't exist.
Brodsky, preach.
We had slavery.
What was that? You said a system of apartheid?
I'm saying
legal
it's-
apartheid.
I'm saying-
Illegal apartheid.
Guys, I got to stop.
Time to drop it.
We're out of
Time to
time.
drop
We're out
it.
of time. Blame Andrew Cuomo on the phone call. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Up next, our Hudson Valley headlines.
Trump.